The Silent Bloom, Chapter 1. The Annual Ache. Seattle, Washington, a city perpetually cloaked in a gentle mist, felt particularly heavy on Evelyn Reed's shoulders. The gray sky mirrored the perpetual ache in her heart, an ache that intensified each year on a specific day in early October. Today marked the 10th anniversary of her son Caleb's death. 10 years. A decade since her vibrant, laughing 16-year-old boy was ripped from her life. Caleb, her brilliant, inquisitive, kind-hearted Caleb. He had drowned during a school trip to the rugged Oregon coast. A cruel twist of fate officially ruled an accidental drowning. Evelyn, a literature professor at a respected Seattle university, had retreated into a life shrouded in grief. Her academic pursuits a fragile shield against the relentless waves of sorrow and an insidious, unspoken guilt that clung to her like damp moss. Every year, on this very day, without fail, a magnificent bouquet of pure white lilies would arrive at her doorstep. Always the same, crisp, fragrant, pristine, and always anonymous. No card, no sender's name, no florist's tag. Just the silent, pristine blooms, a stark reminder of her indelible loss. For the first few years, Evelyn had accepted them as a gesture of profound kindness, a silent sympathy from someone who remembered Caleb, a thoughtful, if melancholic, tribute. But as the years bled into a decade, the anonymity began to gnaw at her. The consistency, the exactness of the timing, the eerie silence of the delivery. It no longer felt like comfort. It felt like a deliberate act, a reminder, a message. A chill, colder than the Seattle air, settled in her bones. What if this wasn't an act of compassion at all? What if it was something more sinister? A constant, unsettling whisper from someone who knew more about Caleb's death than she did. Someone who was involved. The white lilies, once symbols of purity and remembrance, now felt like silent accusers, their delicate petals hiding a terrible secret. The official report stated Caleb had simply slipped on the rocks and fallen into the treacherous currents. But a mother's instinct was a relentless, nagging presence. There were always questions, gaps in the narrative, small inconsistencies that had been dismissed in the chaos of grief. Now, these annual bouquets fueled a burning suspicion. This wasn't just remembrance. This was a penance, or a taunt. Evelyn, usually reserved and academic, felt a primal urge to uncover the truth. She couldn't live another year with this gnawing uncertainty, with the specter of those silent blooms haunting her very soul. She needed to know who was sending them, and more importantly, why. Her grief, once stagnant, now stirred with a fierce, desperate curiosity. She knew only one man who might help her. A man who understood the labyrinthine paths of secrets and lies. Chapter 2. The Investigator's Skepticism. Evelyn reached out to Thomas Miller, or Tom, as he was known. A former detective with the Seattle PD, now a quiet, pragmatic private investigator. Tom had been a casual acquaintance of Daniel's, Evelyn's late husband, and had offered condolences after Caleb's death. He was a man of logic, grounded in facts, not sentiment. She invited him to her quiet, book-lined study, the scent of old paper and dust clinging to the air. She meticulously recounted the 10 years of anonymous lily deliveries, her voice trembling with a mixture of shame and desperation. Tom listened, his expression impassive, occasionally jotting notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "Anonymous gifts are common, Evelyn," he said, his voice deep and measured. especially after a tragedy. People grieve in different ways. Some find solace in quiet gestures. But 10 years, Tom, every single year, without fail, and always white lilies? It's too specific, too deliberate. Evelyn clutched her hands together, her knuckles white. It feels like a shadow, like someone is watching, someone who knows something. Tom raised an eyebrow, a flicker of skepticism in his eyes. Evelyn, I understand your pain, and I know you've been through hell, but we're talking about a cold case here, a tragedy ruled an accident, and you're suggesting someone is sending you flowers as, what? A confession? A taunt? That's a long shot even for my line of work. It's a feeling, Tom, Evelyn insisted, her voice gaining strength. A mother's feeling. I always felt there was more to Caleb's death, more to that day. And these flowers, they're telling me I'm right. She showed him the previous year's bouquet, dried and brittle, a skeletal reminder of its living beauty. Out of respect for Caleb, whom he had met a few times through Daniel, and a reluctant acknowledgement of Evelyn's unwavering conviction, Tom agreed to take the case. I'll do what I can, Evelyn, but don't expect miracles. Anonymous means anonymous for a reason. Tom began his investigation, a process fraught with frustrating dead ends. He visited various florists across Seattle, tracing the origins of the lilies. He found that the bouquets were indeed ordered from different shops each year, always paid for in cash or with anonymous, untraceable prepaid gift cards. No names were ever given, no delivery instructions beyond the address. It was a meticulously planned operation, designed to remain untraceable. He delved into the official police report of Caleb's death, re-interviewing the few remaining officers involved, but found nothing new. The details were sparse. The witnesses, mostly terrified teenagers, had provided fragmented, inconsistent accounts, all chalking it up to a tragic accident. The school, eager to move past the tragedy, had closed ranks quickly. However, Tom did unearth a small detail that had been overlooked. 2 other students, besides Caleb, had been present on the isolated stretch of beach and rocks where the accident occurred. Their names were Liliana and David. They had been Caleb's closest friends, inseparable since middle school. In the chaotic aftermath, their statements had been taken quickly, and they had disappeared from the school and the town shortly after, their families apparently relocating without a trace. Tom's investigator instincts, though initially dismissive of Evelyn's feelings, began to stir. Why had these 2 key witnesses, Caleb's best friends, vanished so completely? Why had their accounts been so vague, so quickly accepted? And what if their disappearance was connected to the silent blooms? The anonymity, the careful planning, the years of silence, it all pointed to something more than a simple gesture of sympathy. It pointed to a secret, a shared secret. And Tom, for the first time, felt a prickle of unease. Evelyn might just be right. Chapter 3. The Ghost in the Classroom. The revelation of Liliana and David's presence at the scene and their subsequent disappearance ignited a terrifying hope in Evelyn. These weren't just anonymous names. These were Caleb's friends. They must know something. They had to. Tom began the painstaking process of tracking them down. It was a difficult task, given the passage of time and the family's apparent desire for anonymity. Meanwhile, Evelyn, consumed by her new quest, continued her work at the university, though her mind was constantly racing. One afternoon, during her modern American literature seminar, Evelyn found herself discussing themes of guilt, memory, and redemption in a novel by Toni Morrison. As she lectured, her eyes fell upon a student in the front row, a young woman with a striking stillness and eyes that seemed to carry an ancient sadness. She was brilliant, contributed insightful, albeit reserved, comments, and her essays on the nature of complicity and confession were remarkably profound. Her name was Liliana. Evelyn paused, a sudden jolt running through her. Liliana, the name on Tom's list. The student was pale, her gaze fixed intently on Evelyn, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. It was a chilling coincidence, or was it? Evelyn's heart hammered. Was this the same Liliana? Was she here in her classroom, carrying a secret about Caleb? After class, Evelyn approached the student. "Liliana," she began, her voice carefully neutral, "your essays are always so insightful. You seem to have a deep understanding of the burden of guilt." Liliana stiffened, her eyes widening slightly. "It's a universal theme, Professor Reed," she replied, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "We all carry our burdens." Evelyn watched her closely, a strange mixture of hope and dread coiling in her stomach. The girl seemed haunted, too haunted for her age. Could this truly be Caleb's friend, hiding in plain sight, sitting in her very classroom? A silent, living reminder of her son's final moments. Tom, meanwhile, made a breakthrough. He located Liliana's old family address, and through it, her current university enrollment. It was indeed the same Liliana, and she was registered at Evelyn's university. The coincidence was too jarring to be a coincidence. Tom then found David Peterson. His family had indeed moved to a remote, isolated town in rural Oregon, not far from the coast where the tragedy occurred. He lived a reclusive life, rarely leaving his home, suffering from severe anxiety and depression. Diagnosed with PTSD, he worked odd jobs remotely and avoided all social contact. This isolation, this profound retreat, was a stark contrast to the lively, outgoing boy Caleb had described. The pieces began to fit, forming a terrifying mosaic. The anonymous flowers, the vanished friends, the haunted student, the reclusive David. It all pointed to a terrible secret, a secret they had carried for 10 long years. Evelyn, armed with Tom's confirmation, confronted Liliana after her next seminar. She held the faded photograph of Caleb and Liliana, arm in arm, laughing, taken years ago. "Liliana," Evelyn said, her voice gentle but firm, "I know who you are, and I know you were there, on that beach, with Caleb." Liliana's face drained of all color. Her eyes filled with a terror so profound it made Evelyn's heart ache. The carefully constructed facade crumbled. Tears welled in Liliana's eyes, and she finally, slowly, nodded. "Professor Reed," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I'm so sorry." The silence in the classroom was deafening, thick with unspoken pain and decades of suppressed truth. The silent blooms, Evelyn realized, were not just a reminder. They were a cry for help, a desperate attempt at confession, a silent plea for absolution. Chapter 4. The Confession on the Coast. Liliana, trembling, agreed to meet Evelyn and Tom at a quiet coffee shop, far from the university campus. The confession that followed was agonizing, punctuated by sobs and long, strained silences. "It wasn't an accident," Liliana began, her voice hoarse, her gaze fixed on her clasped hands. "Not entirely. We were playing a game, a stupid, dangerous game, on the cliffs." She recounted the day, 10 years ago, with vivid, painful detail. Caleb, David, and Liliana, 3 inseparable teenagers, full of youthful exuberance and reckless abandon. They had discovered a treacherous, hidden path along the cliffs, a place forbidden by the school. They were playing a game of dare, pushing each other, testing the limits, feeling invincible. Caleb was always the most daring. Liliana whispered, tears streaming down her face. He jumped over a crevice. David was right behind him. He reached out to push Caleb, just a playful shove, part of the game. But Caleb, he wasn't expecting it. He lost his footing. He screamed. He fell. A sharp, piercing cry escaped Evelyn's lips. It was exactly as she had always feared. Not a simple slip, not an accident. He fell into the water, Liliana continued, her voice breaking. The current, it was so strong. We tried to reach him. We screamed for help, but we were alone. He was gone. Just gone. The terror had consumed them. Two frightened teenagers faced with the unimaginable. They had fabricated the story of Caleb slipping, a story that was plausible enough for the authorities. Overwhelmed by the tragedy and the chaos, they swore each other to secrecy, bound by guilt and fear. They had fled, their families, seeing their profound trauma, choosing to move them away, shielding them from questions, unaware of the full, horrifying truth. The flowers, Liliana sobbed, they were David's idea. He couldn't live with it. He said he had to do something. He couldn't confess. He was too scared, too broken. So he asked me. He said we had to let you know, in a silent way, a way that wouldn't expose us, but would still acknowledge what we did. He pays for them. I organize the delivery. It's been our penance, our confession, every year. Evelyn listened, her heart a raw, bleeding wound. The truth, long sought, was a brutal, agonizing blow. Her son's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a consequence of a reckless game, a fatal mistake, and a desperate cover-up. The anger that surged through her was blinding, overwhelming. For 10 years, they had let her live with the lie, with the guilt, with the unanswered questions. For 10 years, they had sent her these silent reminders, these cruel, elegant accusations. I need to see David. Evelyn stated, her voice cold, devoid of emotion. I need to hear it from him, all of it. Liliana, relieved of her burden but still terrified, agreed. Tom made the arrangements. The meeting was set for a remote, almost desolate stretch of the Oregon coast, not far from where Caleb had died. The very air there seemed to hum with unspoken tragedy. When Evelyn saw David Peterson, she barely recognized the haunted, emaciated young man from the lively boy in old photographs. He was a shell, his eyes wide with a profound, debilitating guilt. His confession mirrored Liliana's, raw with remorse, choked with tears. I didn't mean to, Professor Reed, David choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. It was just a push, a game. I loved Caleb. He was my best friend. I swear. I live with it every day. It's a nightmare. The flowers, I just wanted you to know. I was sorry. So sorry. He clutched his head, rocking back and forth. Consumed by his decade-long torment, Evelyn stared at him, torn between a consuming rage and a chilling pity. He was a broken man, a living testament to the destructive power of guilt and suppressed truth. She had the power to destroy him, to bring him to justice, to finally expose the truth to the world. But what would that achieve? More pain, more destruction. Or could there be another path? A path to something resembling redemption, even for those who had caused such unimaginable pain? The answer, she realized, lay not in vengeance, but in a profound choice, a choice for all of them. Chapter 5. The Weight of Forgiveness. The revelation hung heavy in the air, a thick, suffocating cloud. Evelyn returned to Seattle, her mind a battlefield of emotions. Anger screamed for justice. Grief demanded accountability. But a quieter voice, almost imperceptible at first, whispered of something else. understanding. She consulted with her lawyer, Rebecca Grant, a formidable woman who advised her on the legal ramifications of exposing the truth. They could face charges, Evelyn: manslaughter, obstruction of justice. It wouldn't bring Caleb back, but it might give you a measure of peace. But Evelyn wasn't sure if justice, in its punitive form, was what she truly sought. She looked at David, a shadow of the boy he once was, consumed by 10 years of self-imposed torture. She looked at Liliana, a brilliant young woman haunted by a secret, now desperate for absolution. Would their punishment bring Caleb back? Would it truly heal her own shattered heart? She recalled Caleb, his boundless optimism, his fierce sense of empathy, his unwavering belief in second chances. Caleb had always seen the best in people, even when they didn't see it in themselves. He had been quick to forgive, even quicker to understand. A memory surfaced, one that had been buried under layers of grief. Shortly before his death, Caleb had written an essay for his English class, an assignment on forgiveness. He had never shown it to her, always private about his schoolwork. Now, driven by an urgent need, Evelyn searched his old school files, stored in a dusty box in the attic. She found it, a crumpled, handwritten essay titled "The Unburdening of the Soul, a Case for Forgiveness." In it, Caleb wrote, "Forgiveness is not about forgetting the wrong. It is about remembering, acknowledging the pain, but choosing to release the burden of resentment. It is not for the person who wronged you. It is for yourself. It is the hardest choice, but it is the only path to true freedom." Evelyn read his words, tears blurring her vision. Her own son, even in his youth, had understood a profound truth she was now grappling with. His last words, a silent testament to his compassionate spirit, became her guiding light. She called Liliana and David, requesting another meeting, this time not for confession, but for an ultimatum. "I will not press charges," Evelyn stated, her voice steady, surprisingly calm, "not through the courts. But you both will face your own form of justice. You will go to therapy, intensive, long-term therapy, to confront what you did, to heal from your guilt, and to truly understand the consequences of your actions." Liliana and David, bewildered by her mercy, agreed instantly, relief washing over their haunted faces. "And you will both apologize," Evelyn continued, her gaze firm. "Not just to me, but to Caleb's memory. You will speak the truth, publicly if you choose, or at least to those who need to hear it. You will dedicate yourselves to understanding the true meaning of atonement." And then, a profound moment of shared vulnerability. Evelyn, her voice thick with emotion, looked at David. "I don't forgive you, David. Not yet. The pain is too deep. But I choose to begin the process of understanding, and I choose to release myself from the anger. For Caleb, for me, and for the possibility of a future where you can both truly heal." The lilies. They would continue to arrive for a little while longer, Evelyn decided, not as a taunt, but as a symbol of their ongoing penance, their commitment to atonement. But now, Evelyn knew their true meaning. They were a silent plea, a whispered confession, and a desperate hope for redemption. Chapter 6, Seeds of Redemption. The years that followed were a testament to the transformative power of truth and the arduous journey of healing. Liliana and David, burdened but ultimately liberated by Evelyn's unexpected mercy, embarked on intensive therapy. David, slowly, painstakingly, began to emerge from his self-imposed isolation. He started volunteering at a local youth center, guiding troubled teenagers, pouring his regret and understanding into helping others avoid similar mistakes. He couldn't change the past, but he could try to shape a better future. Liliana, through her therapy, channeled her profound guilt into her academic pursuits. She shifted her focus from abstract literary themes to the practical application of literature for healing and understanding. She excelled in her studies, eventually pursuing a degree in social work, dedicating her life to supporting young people struggling with trauma and difficult decisions. She became a quiet advocate for truth and responsibility, her past a powerful, if painful, motivator. Evelyn, too, found a new purpose. The crushing weight of her grief, once suffocating, began to lift. She still missed Caleb every single day, but the consuming bitterness had lessened, replaced by a quiet strength. She dedicated herself to teaching, but with a renewed passion, focusing her literature courses on themes of resilience, empathy, and the complex path to forgiveness. Her lectures became deeply personal, imbued with a wisdom born of her own harrowing journey. The white lilies continued to arrive each year, faithfully, on Caleb's anniversary. But their meaning had irrevocably shifted. They were no longer silent accusers. They were symbols of remembrance, yes, but also of atonement, of ongoing struggle, and of the fragile, budding hope for redemption. They were a reminder of a life lost, but also of lives profoundly transformed. Evelyn and Liliana developed a fragile, complex relationship, not mother and daughter, nor simply professor and student, but two women bound by a shared traumatic history and a mutual commitment to healing. They sometimes had coffee, discussing books, life, and the quiet, agonizing work of living with a profound truth. David remained more reclusive, his scars deeper, his guilt more profound. But he would send Evelyn letters, often handwritten, detailing his progress, his struggles, his unwavering commitment to making amends. He never explicitly asked for forgiveness, but his consistent efforts, his dedication to living a life of responsibility, spoke volumes. Evelyn revisited the Oregon coast, the site of Caleb's death. This time, she didn't feel the crushing despair of loss. She felt the fierce wind, the spray of the waves, and a quiet sense of peace. She saw not just the place where Caleb had died, but also the place where a painful truth had been born, a truth that had ultimately led to profound understanding. The silence that had haunted Evelyn for so long, the silence of the anonymous blooms, had finally been broken. The fear had subsided, replaced by a deep, unwavering sense of peace. She realized that forgiveness wasn't about condoning the actions of others, but about liberating oneself from the chains of anger and resentment. It was about choosing to live, truly live, with the knowledge that pain can be transformed into purpose and tragedy into a path toward redemption. Chapter 7: The Lingering Scent of Peace. Years continued to pass. Evelyn Reed, once a woman consumed by grief, became a beacon of strength and understanding. Her university lectures on themes of guilt and redemption became renowned, drawing students from far and wide, captivated by her depth of empathy and the quiet wisdom she imparted. She spoke not just from academic knowledge, but from a lived, agonizing truth. The annual lilies still arrived. Now, however, they bore a small, handwritten card. It simply read, "For Caleb, with deepest regret and enduring hope for atonement." It was unsigned, but Evelyn knew who sent them. It was David, through Liliana. And for Evelyn, the silent bloom had finally found its voice. She never fully recovered from Caleb's death. No parent truly does, but she healed. The raw wound had scarred over, leaving a powerful, if tender, reminder of her son. She carried his memory not as a burden of guilt, but as a source of strength, a reminder of his spirit and his belief in compassion. Liliana, now a respected social worker, often reached out to Evelyn, sharing stories of the young lives she touched, lives she helped guide away from the very mistakes that had cost Caleb his life. She was living a life of profound purpose, her atonement found in the tireless work of healing others. David, still living a quiet life in Oregon, found solace in the simple routines of helping his community. He volunteered at a local animal shelter, his gentle nature a comfort to the abandoned creatures. He found his own peace. A fragile but genuine redemption through service and quiet reflection. The legacy of Caleb's death, once a source of bitter pain and endless questions, had transformed. It was no longer just a tragedy, it was a catalyst. It had forced a confrontation with uncomfortable truths, shattered illusions, and ultimately led to a profound, unexpected journey of healing and interconnectedness. Evelyn, sitting by her window overlooking the gray Seattle sky, inhaled the delicate fragrance of the white lilies, their petals unfurling in the quiet light. She felt a profound sense of peace. The anonymity had lifted, the fear had dissipated, and in its place, a complex, unexpected form of understanding had bloomed. The silent bloom had finally spoken, and its message was not one of despair, but of the enduring power of truth, the agonizing beauty of forgiveness, and the silent, profound capacity of the human heart to heal, even after the most devastating loss.